Have you noticed this? There seems to be a real trend bubbling up. Young men who feel kind of let down by the modern world are starting to explore something, well, something ancient, traditional Christianity. Today, we're going to dig into why this is happening, what exactly they're searching for, and what they're finding inside some of the world's oldest churches. But to really get what's going on today, we actually have to go back 2,000 years. Yeah, our story kicks off in ancient Athens with this one mysterious inscription on an altar. It was basically a public admission of a deep spiritual search, and it set the stage for one of the most famous showdowns of ideas in history. All right, here's the game plan. We'll start with that ancient sermon in Athens. Then we'll jump to the modern search for something solid. We'll touch on this desire for enchantment in a disenchanted world, see how a new Mars Hill has popped up online, and then really get into why these men are drawn to church. And finally, we'll see what the verdict was on that hill. Let's do this. Okay, so our story begins on the Areopagus, also known as Mars Hill. You gotta picture this place. It was the intellectual and spiritual heart of Athens. And this is where the Apostle Paul was brought before the city's sharpest minds to explain his, shall we say, strange new teachings. I mean, just imagine the scene. The Apostle Paul is walking through Athens, and he's genuinely bothered by how many idols he sees everywhere. And he's not talking to just anybody. His audience, it's Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. We're talking the intellectual heavyweights of the day. And these Athenians, well, they loved nothing more than debating the latest, hottest new idea. Now, Paul's opening move here is it's brilliant. Instead of coming in hot and condemning them, he finds this little piece of common ground. He points to their altar to an unknown God and uses it as a bridge. He's basically saying, you know that deep spiritual hunger you guys have? That God you admit you don't even know? Well, that's exactly who I'm here to talk about. And from that starting point, he just lays out a worldview that was totally alien to them. He takes them from their whole pantheon of petty, squabbling gods to one single creator. He talks about having a personal relationship with this God, and then, and this was the real shocker for the Greek mind, the idea of a physical resurrection from the dead. Wild stuff for them. Okay, so let's hit the fast forward button. 2,000 years later, that ancient marketplace of ideas has a modern equivalent, and it's revealing this profound search that's happening right now. Our sources suggest that for a whole lot of young men, modern culture just isn't cutting it anymore. So you might be thinking, what does this ancient story have to do with us? Well, it's more relevant than you'd think. The core argument from our sources is that we're living in a new Mars Hill, a chaotic digital world where the old guideposts are gone, leaving a lot of people feeling totally lost and searching for anything solid. The writer Stephen McAlpine talks about this as a crisis on multiple fronts. He argues that educational systems can feel hostile to boys, that the culture often paints men with this broad negative brush, and that our modern world, for all its infinite options, offers a profound lack of meaning. No great cause to fight for, no heroic struggle to undertake. And you can actually see this search in the data. Check this out. A recent survey in Australia found this huge gender divide among Gen Z. Only 17% of young women said Christianity is good for society, but for young men, 37%. That's more than double. I mean, that is a massive gap that shows young men and women are having very different reactions to the world they're living in. So this isn't just about hating on the present moment. No, it's an active search. It's a search for solidity, for weight, for something with deep, ancient roots that can bring some order and meaning to what feels like an increasingly chaotic world. You know, this hunger for meaning, it isn't new. And to really get the philosophy behind it, we can turn to the writer G.K. Chesterton from the early 20th century. He framed this whole debate as a choice between two totally different ways of seeing the entire universe. On one side, you have materialism, this idea that the universe is just a cold, indifferent machine, just the blind destiny of matter. Chesterton saw this as a trap, a viewpoint that makes everything smaller. But on the other side, he saw what he called enchantment, a world that is mysterious, wild, and full of wonder, a place where you can be truly happy, not just comfortable. Chesterton argued that a universe that's purely material, well, it isn't much of a universe at all. He believed that by trying to explain away every bit of mystery, the thing has shrunk, leaving reality feeling way smaller and less interesting than it actually is. He even totally reframes the so-called monotony of nature. He says, what if the sun rising every day isn't just some dead mechanical process? What if it's the result of an infinite divine joy? Kind of like a little kid who's delighted by a magic trick and keeps shouting, "Do it again!" So here's the kicker for Chesterton. Embracing traditional belief, or orthodoxy, it isn't the boring, safe, or easy path. Not at all. He saw it as the ultimate adventure, a thrilling romance, a tightrope walk of sanity that he thought was way more dramatic and demanding than just letting go into madness or materialism. So if this search is really happening, where is it taking place? Where are young men first bumping into these ancient ideas? Well, our sources argue it's happening in a space that looks a whole lot like that ancient marketplace of ideas, the new Mars Hill. I mean, the parallel is pretty striking when you lay it out. The physical hill in Athens has been replaced by the global podcasting sphere. The audience of philosophers is now millions of digital listeners. And the open-air debate has turned into these long-form, sometimes hours-long conversations where basically no idea is off-limits. And on this new hill, the philosophers are figures like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan. Now, they aren't priests or pastors, but they are bringing these ancient ideas about virtue, meaning, and even Bible stories to huge audiences who are actively looking for this stuff. And this isn't just some passive intellectual thing. As Stephen McAlpine points out, Peterson's lectures on the Bible drew huge crowds of young men who paid good money to be there. For a lot of them, this was the spark. It didn't just end with the podcast. It started a real journey that, for a surprising number, led them to literally walk through the doors of a church. But that brings up the next big question, right? Their interest might get sparked online, but what are they actually finding inside these churches that makes them want to stick around? The answer, according to our sources, is probably not what you'd expect. And here's the deep irony. For decades, a lot of churches tried to modernize, to become more relevant to the culture. But what seems to be attracting this new wave of men is the total opposite. The ancient, the traditional, the weird. They're drawn to faiths that don't bend to them, but instead demand that they bend to it. So let's break that down. Multiple sources are pointing to the appeal of traditional Catholic and Orthodox worship. It's physically demanding. You're standing for a long time, you fast, you do prostrations. There's this profound order and structure, a deep sense of reverence and mystery. It gives you a tangible link to 2,000 years of history, a real sense of continuity in a world that feels disposable. One writer from Catholic Man UK frames this whole attraction as a direct antidote to a specific vice that Thomas Aquinas talked about, malidities. It literally means softness. This cultural condition where we become so addicted to comfort and ease that we shrink away from anything that's difficult, even if we know it's for a greater good. The antidote, then, is to build up virtues like perseverance and fortitude. These traditions don't run away from difficulty, they embrace it. It's a core part of spiritual growth. The challenge isn't a bug, it's a feature. And this is all tied to a much bigger calling. In a time when people talk about a crisis of fatherhood, these traditions present a really strong model of spiritual fatherhood, a call for men to lead, protect, and care for their families and their communities. This quote from someone who converted to Orthodoxy just nails it. The rigor, the difficulty, it isn't seen as oppressive. It's seen as liberating. In a world with endless, often paralyzing choices, the discipline and clear expectations of these traditions actually offer a kind of freedom. One source really highlights what's perceived as a split in the call to manhood. On one side, a call to be agreeable, passive, and accommodating. On the other, a call to be a courageous protector in a spiritual battle, to stand firm for your convictions. So the crucial point from this perspective is a rejection of what they see as just appeasing modern culture. There's this deep desire for a faith that doesn't just try to fit in, but that confidently plants a flag in the ground and stands for something timeless and true. All of this brings us full circle. We're right back on Mars Hill, watching Paul deliver his radical sermon to the intellectual elite of Athens. So, how did they react? And what does that tell us about our own time? Yeah, the outcome was not simple. There was no single verdict from the crowd that day. When Paul finished speaking, especially after he mentioned a resurrection, the intellectual consensus just shattered into pieces. The Bible actually tells us there were 3 distinct reactions. First, you had the mockers. Some people openly sneered at him. The idea of a bodily resurrection just sounded like foolishness to them. Then you had the curious. They were intrigued. Their intellectual curiosity was sparked, and they basically said, you know what? We want to hear more about this. And finally, a few, right then and there, they believed and they joined him.
And this, our sources conclude, is precisely what is happening today on the new Mars Hill of podcasts and online debates. As these ancient ideas about meaning, truth, and faith are presented to a new generation, we're seeing that exact same spectrum of responses play out all over again.
So that leaves us with a really powerful question. As this new generation keeps searching for something solid, and as they engage with these ancient ideas, which of those three reactions, mockery, curiosity, or belief, is ultimately going to define our time? The verdict on our own Mars Hill is still very much being decided.